We are all set to go. Welcome, everyone, again. My name is Cassidy Alvarado. I'm the director for our Office of National International Fellowships. And as I just said before the recording started, we're so happy to see so many of you join us today on a Friday after the semester has ended. And we're really excited to either introduce you to Fulbright or clarify some pieces about the Fulbright program. And so today we're going to give more of a bird's eye view, but we have a lot of additional resources moving forward to do deeper dives and to help you figure out if this is the right next step, and if so, when you should apply. So throughout the presentation, you will see photos like the one that you can see here of Alexia, who is an LMU alum and currently in Colombia teaching English abroad. And so we do highlight our LMU Fulbrighters throughout the presentation. What's great, I think, about LMU and our community is that our alumni are very willing to share their experience, both applying and what their experience abroad has been like. So you will have access to our alumni directory, so you can reach out to these individuals. I always say you'd probably rather hear it from the students themselves than us. So please do not be afraid to reach out. Fulbrighters love to talk about their experience. I myself participated in a Fulbright program to South Korea in June of 2022 through a special international education administrators program. And so, if you have an interest in South Korea, I'd love to talk to you maybe about my experience through that program. Different than the programs we're going to chat about today. Before we continue with introductions, I do want to emphasize that this is for the 2025-2026 academic year, but if you are not yet ready to apply for that cycle, it's good that you're here anyway and can start planning ahead, but we will be focusing on timeline, deadlines specifically for this open cycle, which again is for the 2025-2026 academic year. So I've already introduced myself, director of our Office of National International Fellowships, and I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Lindsay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Anderson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fellowships advisor here in ONIF. And I tag team with Cassidy for Fulbright. And so we will be two of the handful of mentors who will be working with all of our applicants this cycle. Very excited to work with everybody.
Thanks, Lindsay. Do you want to start us off with our welcome activity?
Absolutely. So I'm dropping here in the chat a link to Mentimeter as well as the little code for it. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And if you are on like a desktop or a laptop and you're able to just scan the QR code, you can play along with your cell phone. I'll give us just a moment for folks to log in for it.
And we're really hoping this gets you excited about Fulbright. You don't have to know anything. This isn't a trick. It's really just to start getting those creative juices flowing and thinking about envisioning yourself in a Fulbright, which our program's abroad. So we'll be focusing a lot on that.
Yeah. All right. So I think everybody has probably logged into it now. So to start off with, let us know a little bit more about where you're at right now in your academic journey. So go ahead and indicate to us whether you are going to be a senior next year, you're currently a grad student who's going to be graduating probably in 25, recent graduate, so you've been out of LMU for all of a week, or maybe an alumni, you've been out of LMU for a year or more. And then other might be something else. So if you are an other, maybe you're staff and faculty, and we can talk to you about some of the other Fulbright programs as well. I don't have a good idea of how many people we have grand total in the room. This looks about right. Okay, fantastic. So if you are somebody who is more of a recent graduate, or you're a couple years out, or you're a grad student, whatever the case might be, if you have any misgivings about the fact that, maybe Fulbright might be looking for something different than what you are picturing for yourself at your stage in life, please know that your life experience really can go a long way in making you very competitive for this application process. We have worked with alumni who have been, even as far back as like 1994. The way that Fulbright kind of works for it is they really want to get you within the first 5 years of your career. But if you've changed careers, then that timer restarts to some extent. So that can be very good in how you represent yourself in your application. Please don't feel any, insecurities about that. And then for people who are rising seniors, you have just as good of a chance as anybody else as well. So we just want to like boost your confidence to get started with the process. But this is cool, and I love seeing that we have like a whole lot of different, types of students and recent graduates who might be interested in Fulbright. All right. So when you think about what it is that you want to do after your Fulbright, which one of these grants can connect you best with that goal? And so some of you might be coming to this already knowing I want to teach English in another country, or hey, I want to do a creative project, or I want to try to get a degree abroad. Let us hear from you about which one of these best fits with your plans and your goals.
And based on what you know right now, we realize some
Yeah.
of you coming in with like, I know very little about Fulbright. I think the binational business program is sort of a hidden gem
Mhm.
for our students with business backgrounds who speak fluent Spanish. It's a really fantastic opportunity that we will talk more about. So if you're like, I don't really know quite yet, that's okay too.
Yeah. All right. So I love seeing that we have a smattering of different grants that people are interested in. Would anybody want to unmute and talk about the grant type that they are planning to pursue? I see Henry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Henry Davies, he, him pronouns. I was the one that selected other. I'm not sure exactly what
Oh,
area I fall into.
okay.
Um, I just recently graduated LMU all but less than a week ago. But I have been accepted to the University of Essex at East 15 Acting School. So studying theater, acting. Um, Abroad in the UK. That's sort of where I'm coming from. I'm looking to, open all scholarly, intellectual avenues in order to maximize my education abroad. Um, and that's sort of where I am. And I got this email, so that's sort of what I'm looking to do because LMU was not cheap. So I'm looking to mitigate costs on my own personal end as much as possible. Uh, yeah, so
Awesome.
that's where I am.
Thanks so much for sharing out, Henry. I also see that Bianca has raised their hand. So Bianca, do you want to share about which one of these grant types you're interested in as well?
Hi. So yes, I selected the English teaching assistantship one. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Yes, I selected English teaching assistantship. So I'm technically still a grad student, but I'm just completing my one last class and then I'm done. I'm in the English major, and as a part of our like grad, we have to teach. So I have like the teaching experience. So teaching English abroad, I really feel like it just would help me, especially as I like pursue further down the education field. I want to go on to eventually pursue my doctorate, and I feel like doing this specifically in the country I want will also give me a competitive edge for when I do go to get my doctorate. Also, I would love the opportunity. This was mentioned to me when I was a senior in undergrad, and I was like, I would never do that. I'd never get it. But now I feel like I need to have some confidence, so I'm manifesting that I will get it.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank both of you so much for sharing out. I'm hearing some fantastic connections to what Fulbright has to offer. So thank you both so much. Moving to our next page, y'all, I try to get this map as big as possible. So to the best of your ability, I think given how small some of these countries might be, especially like in the Europe area or, Eurasia area, go ahead and indicate for us where it is that you want to go.
This is tough. I have fat fingers
Okay.
and I have a small screen.
Okay.
I just want to put that.
Well, we won't hold you to it.
And we also, again, many of you are still exploring, like, I don't even know where I can go on a Fulbright. And that's something we'll address as well. So sort of just initial instincts. And,
Yeah.
I think we always appreciate folks who have come in with like a open mind and might have an idea, but are willing to expand that by learning more about it.
Yeah. All right. See about 5 people. This is cool. Well, on our end, this is quite hopeful because the UK does tend to be like a magnet for people who want to, pursue a Fulbright. But I'm really, heartened to see a lot of other world regions highlighted in this. So that's great. Give it just one more moment. Okay. All right. Well, as Cassidy mentioned, if you're still sort of like in flux about it and you are thinking through it, here for this question. So if you already knew which country that you were going to apply for, go ahead and give us like briefly, like what is it that makes you want to go to that country? Have you traveled there before? Is it someplace that you've always wanted to visit? Whatever fits for you. But if you're still very open-ended, then like give us some of like the guiding thoughts that are occurring to you about how or why you would choose a country. Like I want to go someplace that I already have some exposure to from like how diverse Los Angeles is, for example. Anything fits here. And I'm going to set a very small timer just so we don't linger on this one for too terribly long of about 90 seconds. So not a rush, but whatever gets put up here, we'll see people's entries as they appear. All right, so I'm going to read some of the responses that are coming in. High research opportunities, especially looks like discipline specific. Um, I've found a graduate school in Shakespeare, so I want to study and perform at the Globe, and also has other connections to other languages. That's fantastic. Interest in ancient Greek culture, and so getting the opportunity to travel there in specific would be amazing. So if we're looking at future places that we're still quite open, creative spaces that align with the degree, that's going to be fantastic. And trying to filter through a lot of different possibilities for yourself. Someone said that they have studied abroad and have been to the UK, so they would like to explore more. Interest in Latin American history and culture as a Latina. Love that. Yeah. A lot of people do apply for countries that maybe they have like historical family roots there, even if they've been there before or haven't been there before. Independent research projects related to a specific discipline. And so I think finding a country that practices, I remember seeing earlier, somebody identified India. So finding a country that practices something that you're interested in researching in, I think that's really key to say like this research can only be done in a particular world region or country. All right, trying to find something that has to do with your major or minor. Yeah, let's make the most of the time you spent at LMU. And then pursuing master's in fine arts. Again, let's find a degree program. So if you're pursuing an international degree, let's find a program that fits you best. And it sounds like that person might be quite open to whichever country applies the best for that opportunity. So that's fantastic. All right. So on this one, I think we're almost done with our little icebreakers here. I would love for you to rank maybe like just the top 5 or so out of these 8 options. You can rank all 8, but if that's like, ooh, these are a lot, then don't worry about it. Um, what's something that you're really trying to get out of your Fulbright experience when you think about going abroad for the better part of a year? We're going to talk about some of the lengths of these grant durations, but for the most part, we can just think about it as like at least one academic year. Um, and so we can go this whole gamut of like, oh, I'm going to like learn more about myself. I'm going to learn about countries. I get to be of service in a global community, or, I get to build my portfolio more, or I get to pursue research in the place where they do that thing that I want to research. Any of these are valid. And then if you hadn't thought about it before, like, oh, also, I get to just sort of be an ambassador to other countries in a way. Huh, I hadn't thought about it like that before. Then I hope that we're kind of planting a seed of excitement for you as well as you're starting to think about your application for Fulbright. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of people who do want to be of service. I love that because that's definitely in line with our values here at LMU. Meeting new people seems to be a pretty good second here. That's great. All right, I'm seeing some like additional support for like, adding to the portfolio, doing research. And then like stepping outside of one's comfort zone. This is really good to see that people are expecting that kind of experience, because it'll teach you a lot being in a brand new place, especially if you've never had to like go somewhere and restart here in the US. That's a little bit what your experience might be on a Fulbright experience. So awesome. All right. So this is fantastic, and I really appreciate you all sharing with your rankings and your priorities. This is really great. All right, so this is just a little bit of a quiz here, and you can just select on a sliding scale. In a typical year, how many people do you think apply for a Fulbright application? And we have here from 3,000 to 10,000. Okay. All right. So you have almost everybody who's ranked in. So on a typical year, it's a little over 9,000. Last year, I think they received a bit over 10,000 applications, but Fulbright was like, this was a record-breaking year. So there are several people who do apply for this opportunity. And I want us to be mindful about how many people actually do get offered a grant for Fulbright. And so here we have a scale between 1,000 and 5,000. How many people do you think win a Fulbright in a typical year? All right, I think we have a big response for just about 1,000. And then I see a note in the chat. 200 in the chat. 200? As low as 200? Okay. All right. Well, we have almost everybody who's voted in. So hopefully this will be a little optimistic for you. About 2,200 people win a Fulbright. And a lot of things have happened in the world. I don't know if you've noticed. And so Fulbright is kind of like at the mercy of like a pandemic, for example. And then how like a lot of state governments, a lot of international governments might be like changing how they view people coming into their country, things like that. Some Fulbright countries that do take a lot of English teaching assistants, for example, they may have really good successes with the people that they have, and they basically rehire some of those ETAs. And so if it looks like there are like a bunch of grants available for a country, and then at the end of that cycle, maybe there are fewer, it's not because you weren't competitive. It's because the circumstances there changed a little bit, and they just weren't bringing in as many ETA grant winners as they had originally communicated. And so there can be a lot of factors to this, but I hope that this is at least a little bit more of a silver lining for a lot of people who voted, that it was just about 1,000. So it's about the statistics don't super matter because it's a case by case. So if you look at this big bird's eye view of it, you can get really kind of lost in the numbers for it. But what we are going to do now, I'm going to pass this over to Cassidy to continue us, is to start really thinking about how you can be the most competitive so that hopefully you can be one of these 2,200 people in the following application cycle. So thank you all so much for participating with my little Menti game. This was fun. Thank you.
Oh, all right. So thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for everyone for participating. Yeah, it's important to keep in mind overall numbers. So yeah, about 2,100, 2,200 grants each year. But as Lindsay mentioned, the statistics and even trying to say, okay, so there's 2,200, 10,000 apply. What are my odds? Isn't accurate, because it really is based on country to country and grant type to grant type. There are certain countries that are just generally more competitive. They're getting more applications for those programs in the UK than they might in another country, for example. And so it's really hard to compare these apples and oranges when we're dealing with over 140 countries and different grant types as well. So let's get into sort of the nuts and bolts about Fulbright. So this is a US Department of State program, which means that, their goal is to foster and promote mutual understanding between the US and, as I said, over 140 countries. So between you and your host country. And the different grant types that we're going to discuss today. So again, there are multiple programs within Fulbright to teach English abroad, to pursue graduate study abroad, or to conduct an independent project. And that could be research or creative arts. There are also some specialized grants that don't fall under any of these categories that we'll briefly highlight as well. But the goal is really this cultural exchange piece, regardless of which grant type, so teaching English, pursuing graduate study, independent research. You are there to be a cultural ambassador, and it's ambassador with a little a, right, of the US. And you're not there to represent all Americans. You are there to represent your American experience. And so keep that in mind. I fully believe each and every one of you has a unique story to tell, a unique background. And that's something that Lindsay and I and our other Fulbright mentors help our applicants articulate when they go through this application process. Applicants like Jenny Mendez, who is actually our assistant director of alternative breaks at LMU currently, but she did go through the Fulbright application process through LMU. I fondly remember working with her on her application to Romania, where she did teach English at a university for a year. So again, great people that you can reach out to afterwards, alumni who can share their experience and applying as well as their experience abroad. So let's get into the specific grant types. So where I will say LMU has been the most successful, and this also means where we've had the most applicants, is through the English Teaching Assistant Program, also called ETA program. This isn't available in about 75 countries, and it's typically you want to plan for at least 1 year abroad, academic year or full calendar year, but thinking about travel, arrival, getting situated in your host community, you probably want to factor at least 12 months roughly for these ETA programs. And your goal is to help teach the English language while serving as that cultural ambassador. And depending on the country, there may be different placements. So you could be in a elementary, middle school, high school, or even a university level placement, like what Jenny did in Romania. So I always joke, I work in higher ed for a reason. I know I would not be as happy maybe working with really young children. That's just not my cup of tea. And so maybe I start looking for countries that only have high school or university level placement, and that can help you narrow down your host country. About 40 of these countries do not require applicants to speak the host country language. And so if you only speak English, you might have to filter by that way. And what I will say when we say, language skills, you're going to see as you look through different countries that there's recommended and required. Required is obviously non-negotiable. If you don't speak novice or intermediate or advanced, whatever the country criteria might be, you are not eligible to apply. But recommended or preferred, you should also think of in your mind as required, because these are quite competitive grants. And you are going to be competing against students who do meet that requirement or that preference. So that's another way to kind of help you figure out if you're torn between 3 countries, one of them has a recommended language requirement, you might want to put that lower on your list if you don't meet that. Okay. And here's Joseph on the right here, currently in Taiwan teaching English abroad. So if you would like to connect with Joseph afterwards, I know he'd be very happy to speak to students about his experience as well. Second grant type is the graduate degree grants, or to pursue a graduate degree abroad. This is available in about 33 countries, and the majority fund 1-year master's programs, which I know is still a bit of a foreign concept in the US, as many of our master's programs are 2-year, although we're seeing more 1-year programs emerge as well. And when we say taught or research, so taught is probably, again, what we are more familiar with in the US, where you're going to have coursework, classes that you'll have to take, maybe culminating in a thesis or capstone. Whereas research is exactly what it sounds like. It is you are from start to finish conducting research. You might have some supplemental support. It might not be a formal course, but you would still then end up with your master's degree. For the research side of master's programs, you would need to have a pretty fully fleshed out research proposal as part of your application. So keeping that in mind, it does take some legwork for the graduate degree grants to do your background work on, am I eligible for this graduate program? Does it meet what I'm looking for? Do I meet their requirements? And then it's saying, okay, yes to all of those. Now it's time to apply for Fulbright. Now, there are some 2-year masters that are funded, and sometimes even doctoral programs. It might only fund the first year of a doctoral program. Other very specific grants will fully fund a doctoral program. These are usually at specific universities in specific fields. So there's a lot of exploration that needs to be done when you are approaching Fulbright application. So that's the one, if you remember anything from today, is that you need to spend some time on the website to make sure that you understand what's available, that you meet that criteria before you sort of jump in. And we can help guide as well. Many of these graduate degree grants are taught in English. So even in countries where it might be, somewhat surprising, I always use Taiwan has quite a few graduate degree grants, but in very specialized fields, but most are taught in English. And so if you should really focus on your discipline, your area, cast that wide net and see where the best graduate program happens to be abroad. And then see if Fulbright has a grant that can fund it. So to kind of address Henry, because he mentioned, being admitted to a program in the UK, which is fantastic. Congratulations. Where we are right now is we are seeking applicants for the 2025-2026 year. So if your plans are to go next year, those deadlines have passed. So unfortunately, Fulbright would not be able to fund graduate study in the UK for next year. However, there may be an opportunity at a future year for you to look at this specific program. So Fulbright's really interesting. It doesn't bypass the admissions process. You would first, though, apply for the Fulbright, and then you're applying admissions into the graduate degree program. So it's a bit counterintuitive, but the Fulbright application is due first, followed by the graduate degree admissions application. Henry?
Yeah, so just to clarify what you were saying, because I haven't applied, I didn't apply for the previous Fulbright year, prior to applying to this graduate program and being accepted. So that would sort of nullify my eligibility. Would it be possible to, because it's a 2-year master's program, to have the second year be funded as well, or is that also not possible?
So Fulbright, generally speaking, you cannot be in country before the Fulbright grant starts. So you couldn't do the first year there. And this is, again, a full year if you're planning to study abroad or you have studied abroad in the country for a short period. But no, they would not fund your second year. There is the possibility, and we'd have to look, because I'd have to look at which graduate program that you mentioned. We'd have to kind of double check. If you were to defer your admissions and apply this next cycle, but I mean, we would have a very honest conversation about, the pros and cons of that and the chances of getting the Fulbright to a country that is probably one of, if not the most competitive in all of the Fulbright catalog. That's not to dissuade anyone, but we also, if you are already set to go, we would hate for you to defer with, this idea that there's maybe one award for you to win competing against all these other students. So I would encourage you afterwards, if you want to talk to us and have that conversation. And that's a lot of what we do, is sort of individual advisement as well. But it is, at this point, if you've been already accepted for a graduate program abroad and planning to go in the 24-25 year, that Fulbright deadline has passed for that. We are only looking at 25, 26 and beyond. Okay. And then many of the Fulbright graduate degree grants include the standard benefits, which we will talk about for all of the awards, but the addition may be covering tuition. So in this case, using Anna here as an example, she studied at Tel Aviv University to get her master's in conflict resolution. That was the pandemic year, so she only got to spend a semester and then had to finish her degree remotely. And now she's working for I completely forgot. She's working in, not the UN, but she's working abroad currently in the same sort of international relations field, and also very willing to talk to students and applicants from LMU about her experience. So keep that in mind. Graduate degree grants do not bypass the admissions process. You still have to meet all minimum admissions criteria for any graduate program, but you're applying for Fulbright first. If you have questions as we go through, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We will also, many of you submitted questions in your registration form that we're going to address at the end in case we don't get to it. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay to talk about the independent projects category.
All right. So as you can see here, Fulbright Big Picture can go to about 140 countries. Independent projects can go to 118 countries out of that 140 plus. And so what we want to really think about here is how can you find a country that has your project in mind. So I described earlier about, with disciplinary specific things, I want to do like a research project, for example, then let's go to a country that only really fits that research project agenda and idea that you have. So here, very similar with the independent projects, I get chills every time I think about it, but like a couple of years ago, the one independent project grant that was available for the UK was won by somebody who wanted to write a novel about how echoes work in the tunnels of the subways so that they could write a story about people who were hiding from Blitzkrieg during World War II and still communicate across vast distances. I still get chills now in the retelling of that. And so for folks who may be coming from creative disciplines, please know that for this application type, you will need to also submit a portfolio. And if you are doing something that really is trying to capture about cultures or, human behaviors and societies and things like that, you might also have the opportunity to secondarily apply for a special award with the National Geographic Society. I worked with an applicant last year who was a semifinalist who wanted to do a documentary in Vietnam. And then we also walked through the Nat Geo application as well, which will provide with some additional funding. But, we'll cross those bridges when we get to it. But in any event, this can be basically all up to you about how you want to structure this. As you can see here, the grants might be anywhere from 4 to 12 months. But then, there might be a couple of guidelines about a date by which your grant could start. But like, let's say that you wanted to document something about like rainy seasons or the monsoon season in Southeast Asia. Well, then you would want to structure your grant around that. So you do have a lot of flexibility and freedom with this. But what we want you to start thinking about is how can you build on work that you've already done? And how can you create a project that's really going to be attractive on a global stage? And so I had a visitor come in and I maybe missed part of the discussion when it comes to the research projects. But what I will say is, we really want you to start thinking about how your independent project, whether it's going to be research, creative arts, along those lines, can really feed into how like the world is starting to talk about and think about topics that are global issues. So we try to get you to start thinking through some of the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals, and how can you attach your project to one of the 17 goals that are stated through the UN SDGs. And I think hopefully with this way, you can feel very confident that like the work that you want to do will fit into something that the host country will see as valuable and worthwhile to, again, like more of this global context and community. Please note that, as you are thinking about an independent project, whether it's going to be research or a creative arts project, depending on the nature of your project, you might not necessarily need any additional language skills. But for some of them, it kind of makes sense that you would have some experience with the language if, for example, your project, whether it's creative arts or research, is going to be to interview people in the host country. So be mindful of that as you are starting to think through the kind of projects that you want to pursue. Some countries universities, their grants might include funding for translators or interpreters, but not every single one of them does. And so be very mindful. Fulbright this year in specific has also really increased a lot of transparency in the funding and the grant types, what they're looking for in profiles, but then also like what you can expect by living in that host country. So check for that. And if there isn't anything there, we can talk to you about who you could contact at Fulbright or in the host country to ask if there are possibilities to help you with that. But again, for the most part, as you can see from this slide, about 50 or more countries will not require language, but your project might, right? So let's be mindful of those things. All right, go ahead, Cassidy.
Yeah, if I can just add one other piece to this, when we think about independent projects and especially research, so creative arts, there needs to be some evidence of your ability to conduct independent projects. And so what we see quite often are students who are really eager to first look into this category and maybe not think what we mean about independent. When we say independent, we mean independent. You are not only in the application process designing the project from start to finish. This is before you've been awarded, right? So you need to logistically know how to write and draft a feasible timeline, how to articulate your needs, so what resources you're going to need, and you need to show evidence that you have the abilities and skills to conduct that project. So if you're conducting a research project, do you have undergraduate research experience? And this is typically beyond just the classroom, because research projects in the classroom are different than, say, being part of a research group, a team, a lab, sort of outside of it. Many of the successful applicants for this independent project category are graduate students who are maybe doing the project as part of their master's thesis or their doctoral dissertation. Now, that doesn't mean, undergraduates can't be successful. And we had a successful applicant back in 2017 do one in sort of ecology, in biology, but he had extensive undergraduate research experience in his host country. So again, this isn't to dissuade any candidates from this category, but if you have never conducted sort of research or creative project independently, you may want to consider one of the other grants. And if you are interested in gaining more research experience, perhaps a graduate degree grant that has a research component is a better fit. And so, have that sort of conversation with us about whether or not you have the experience to conduct the project that you want to propose. As Lindsay said, taking an existing research project that maybe you completed at LMU and expanding it is a great idea. But making sure that you also have the abilities and skills to do it independently without, say, the faculty mentor that you had at LMU that probably guided you along that way. All right, last sort of we're going to call specialized sort of the other category, because there are some grants that don't really fall under any of the three categories. So the first one that I mentioned that I think is sort of a hidden gem is the Binational Business Program to Mexico. I've only had one student ever apply, and that's Carlos here, since I've been at LMU in 2017. Maybe a second one who applied along the way, but really only two. And since I've been at LMU, and this is I don't think program existed much before that, but this is a chance to do sort of a post-grad internship in Mexico with a binational company. So it could be, an international company or a non-governmental organization. And so they're always looking for people who have sort of business backgrounds, marketing, finance, accounting, general management. Carlos was international relations, political science. So again, if you do have to speak advanced Spanish for this program, but you essentially work for a company for a year, getting that international work experience. Also in Mexico is a big supporter of Fulbright, is a public policy initiative. This is for more, I would say, advanced individuals. I believe you have to have at least a master's. So something for maybe our law school students. We did have a law school student participate in this also, I think, in 2017. and that is to work on public policy in Mexico. So working with different organizations and the government. So that is a specialized grant. One that I think is really fun. I never did debate in high school, but if you did debate in high school or something similar in your college career, they're looking for debate coaches, and this is in English. So you'd be helping students prepare for debate competitions in Taiwan, but these are conducted in English. And so I think that's a pretty unique and interesting grant. And then Lindsay also mentioned the National Geographic Award. So this is not a standalone grant. Anybody applying for an independent project, so creative or research, can opt, if they're selected as a semifinalist, to be considered for the National Geographic Award. And that just comes with additional benefits and opportunities to work with Nat Geo. And that's something you can learn more about. There's usually a specific theme for the year, and you can, see what other Nat Geo recipients have done. But again, this one's not standalone, so it would be for those who you first apply for under the independent project category, and then if you're selected as a semifinalist, you can then indicate, and there's sort of a secondary application component at that time to be considered. All right, we've got still quite a bit to cover, so we're going to go through this somewhat quickly and just leave as much time as possible for questions. So basic eligibility, have to be a US citizen because this is a Department of State program, and then conferred bachelor's degree by August 2025. What does that mean? It means you must have graduated with at least your bachelor's by August 2025. So we are currently seeking rising seniors, recent grads, so those that just graduated a week ago, and then alumni, as well as graduate students. So graduate students have an option. So let's say you just finished your first of 3 years of an MFA program at LMU. You can apply for this cycle. And then that would mean taking a year, right? Taking a year off, so to speak, or taking a year to do your Fulbright before returning to complete your third and final year. Otherwise, you can apply as a graduating student as in a graduate program or a recent alum of a graduate program. So graduate students have a little bit more flexibility. For our undergrads, have to have at least that bachelor's by August of 2025. No minimum GPA, but I will say it does depend on the grant. So while there's no minimum GPA for Fulbright, graduate programs often have minimum GPAs. So if you're planning to apply for a graduate degree grant, remember Fulbright does not bypass the admissions process. So you have to meet the admissions requirements, which might be a minimum GPA for that grad program. Okay, and for the others, like I said, the ETA or for the independent projects, it's less about a GPA and more about what experience you can show in the application that sets you up as a competitive candidate to teach English or to conduct the project. So you have to show evidence that you have the ability to do what you're proposing. And then foreign language skills also vary by host country, as we've talked about, and then that relevant experience. There are English teaching assistant placements in certain countries where you don't have to have any teaching experience. Others where they do expect you to have at least some tutoring, maybe mentoring, volunteering experience, and even others that are looking for or give preference to even like credentialed teachers. So keep that in mind when you're searching for host countries, to really read the individual country requirements closely. And we got 2 more LMU alums here to highlight. We have Eamon, who is also currently in Ecuador, I think finishing up his year teaching English. And then Fasa completed a graduate degree grant at University College London in entrepreneurship. Lindsay?
All right. So big picture, Cassidy's already mentioned about the cultural exchange opportunities here, and that you're not necessarily representing all of America, but your own American experience. Fulbright really does place a premium on trying to show the diversity of the American experience without necessarily kind of going to like that traditional DEI component of it, though, which they do really support. We also wanted to highlight the fact that Fulbright does try to provide as much reasonable accommodation as possible for people who have apparent and non-apparent disabilities. Fulbright does partner with another national organization called the National Clearinghouse on Disability in Exchange, which is administered by Mobility International USA. And so there are even programming, I guess it's like a little webinar that they're going to be running over the course of the summer for people who are interested in these opportunities and like what kind of reasonable accommodations can be made so that you can hear from Fulbright alumni about their experiences and how Fulbright was able to step up for them. There's like more than one full web page from the Fulbright website describing about how you can get in contact with program coordinators who serve Fulbright, but they help coordinate for the different world regions under which you can apply for your grants. So please do not hesitate to like access these resources. Those folks can give you the most specific. If you haven't figured out by now, a lot of Fulbright, the response to it is like, well, it depends, or like case by case situations. So those are the folks who are going to have the most direct experiences with these, and they can tell you about what you might need to expect, and then also set some reasonable expectations about the experience of like living in that country for a year, because not every country that you might travel to has something like the United States with the American Disabilities Act. So please know that those are resources that are available. And then here in our office, whether you have a disclosed or sorry, a diagnosed or undiagnosed, maybe hidden disability, you can communicate with us about your need for some accommodations. But talk with us about that individually. You don't need to do that here. But communicate with us and we will try our absolute best to work with you as well. And we do try to provide our content for Brightspace, which is where we house all of our Fulbright guidance. We do try to present that in as multimodal fashion as possible. And so if you need some additional resources that like play nicer with screen readers, for example, we will do whatever we can to accommodate that. And that's why we also are recording this with captions, for example.
Thanks, Lindsay. All right, the good stuff, the benefits. So we like to say that really Fulbright is meant to be a fully funded program. They do not want financial, need to be a consideration for, or, self-select out because maybe you can't afford to do Fulbright. So benefits for all are round trip transportation. So your flights to and from your host country. Living stipend, this does vary by country and placement within the country. What's great about this year is they've added some average stipends based on previous cycles for each country and location. So you can get a sense of how much your stipend might be. Remember that it's always in flux, especially with conversion rates and all of that. But it does depend. And I always joke, like if you are teaching English in Paris, France, your stipend is going to be higher than if you're maybe in, rural Ecuador, right? So keep that in mind. There isn't just a set number for living stipend, but that living stipend is meant to cover your room and board. So typically Fulbrighters rent an apartment, rent a room, oftentimes rooming with other Fulbrighters or locals. One of my favorite students, this was pre-LMU, taught English in Spain, and she ended up rooming with 5 Spanish citizens. But it really helped her stretch her stipend. That gave her some extra funding each month so that she could travel around Europe in her downtime. So she was very thrifty and very strategic with her stipend. That sounds like a lot to be living with 5 other people, but you can kind of, Fulbright will help and give you some resources, but ultimately it is your choice where you end up living, and you kind of have to make those arrangements. And then also, the room and board piece, so your groceries, other incidentals, that's all part of the living stipend. You also get basic accident and sickness health benefits. And if you do have a significant other or children, you can look for countries that offer dependent allowance. Now, again, this isn't going to be a lot, but it can be helpful if you do plan to bring, significant other, children. You can look for countries that do offer additional dependent support. And then additional benefits, and this depends on the grant type, the host country, a range of reasons. Tuition fees for the graduate degree grants, Anyone who is selected as an ETA will go through a 60-hour teaching English as a second language online training. You can be waived from that if you already have TESOL certification or TESOL training. Some countries offer even more beyond that, and I can't remember off the top of my head if it's South Korea, but one country gives you full certification so that you will actually leave your, when you're done with ETA year, you'll leave with TESOL certification. And that can be a huge benefit, especially if you want to continue in this field. Midterm enrichment activities. So larger Fulbright programs, for instance, in Taiwan, they bring Fulbrighters together maybe once or twice a year to do a cultural activity as a group. You might visit the US Embassy. You might, go to a cultural or heritage site. But they would fund that as well. There's also some regions that offer midterm conferences. And so you get to meet all the Fulbrighters from that region come together, and it's a great networking event, but that does depend on the region. And then some countries also offer language study courses or a stipend so that you can learn the host country language, through a formal class or something like that. So a lot of these benefits you'll find in the specific country grant pages. And so if that's intriguing to you, make sure you're flagging that. It can be a great reason for why you want to go to a country and something you could write about in your application. All right, so next steps, and then this is sort of a bird's eye view, and then Lindsay's going to do a deep dive into the timeline. So where we are right now. So right now, your focus, if you do want to apply for this open cycle, which again is for the 25-26 academic year, you want to explore those host countries, right? You need to do your research. We have some tutorial videos that we're going to share after today that will help guide you, because it can be, I always say in the video, I say it's a maze to look through the Fulbright website. When there's over 2,100 grants, it's going to be kind of like sifting, right? A needle in a haystack is what we say a lot. So take some time to explore the website, explore what's available, explore what you want. What is it that you are looking for in this experience? At the same time, you might want to connect with some of the Fulbrighters that we've mentioned in the slides today. Even Fulbrighters that didn't attend LMU. So there's a grantee directory that you can use on the Fulbright website. You can reach out to these folks on LinkedIn, especially if it's in a country or with a project that we haven't had a recent recipient for. So, reach out. Like I said, Fulbrighters love talking about themselves. They want to share their experience. Don't be afraid to shoot an email or message someone on LinkedIn about their Fulbright experience. If possible, and there's still, there is still time before the national deadline to gain some additional skills. If you are looking to have more teaching experience, to be more competitive, volunteer this summer at a summer school or a local community program working with children or young adults, whatever that age is that you're seeking to support through your ETA. If it's research or graduate study, what might you be able to do between now and the deadline to strengthen your skills, right? Something that you can then refer to in the application. And then we're going to talk about the first checkpoint, which is our intent to apply, coming up on June 1st. But I will turn it over to Lindsay to discuss. Oh, went backwards.
All right. So as mentioned, our intent to apply form is due June 1st. And then once we have that initial group of folks who are interested in applying, we will have one more of these sort of presentations where we go through the campus process a little bit more granularly. So the entire session will be just talking about the campus process. We will be working in tandem with some faculty and staff from LMU who will be mentors to support applicants who are looking at study grants or research grants, and possibly even independent project grants for the creative arts, just so that you are getting some feedback from folks who might be a little bit closer to your discipline, and they can provide that context for you when giving you feedback about some of your application materials. Cassidy and I are also in the mix there, but we'll be predominantly working with ETA applicants, and then maybe to a smaller extent some of these other grant types as well. But please know that you might get partnered with somebody as a Fulbright mentor besides Cassidy and myself. And then throughout June, so in late June, we're going to start our brainstorming sessions for the two largest writing components for your application, which are going to be the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement. And we will have that kind of divvied up for the statement of grant purpose. We're trying to achieve different things based on the grant. And then the personal statement will have everybody meet with me to talk about personal statements because that does not differentiate between these application types. And then throughout July and August, we will host a series of essay workshops that will really target each of those writing components. So we will have two from each of us for each grant type, for the personal statement, for the SOGP, so the statement of grant purpose. And then we will also have an additional handful of workshops, which we call applicant's choice. So for this one, you can just show up and we will look at and workshop any writing sample that you want, including the shorter answer questions that are part of the application as well. Our campus deadline to have everything wrapped up and tied with a bow is going to be August 31st. And this includes everything except for foreign language evaluations, if that pertains to you. Please note, you should not submit your application to Fulbright by this date. So more details on that whenever you attend the June 7th, but do not submit your application on this date. And then we will host Zoom interviews, which I want you to think of more as we're trying to get the absolute best thing at the, in the month preceding the national deadline. So these Zoom interviews, are really just trying to get other eyes on your application materials and differing perspectives, just so that we can do our absolute best to get you as competitive as possible for your application. So we will be scheduling those and sending out like a form for you to communicate your ability to us in early September. And then for those of you who will be wanting to demonstrate that you have language skills so that you can be competitive for your grant, we will have a deadline for that for you to complete your foreign language evaluation. We will explain a little bit more of that process at our June 7th meeting as well. And then guess what? Fulbright already knows when its deadline is. It is October 8th. And so it's on this day that you will hit submit for your application. And this last cycle, we had a little I hit submit party. So I think, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to have an opportunity to do that this year as well. It was very, very fun. And then you just get to sit and wait. It's a long waiting game for Fulbright for sure. So by January 31st, we will have an idea of the semifinalists. Typically, everybody has been communicated to about whether they will be selected as a semifinalist by the end of that month. We cannot expect that there will be early communications about that, but this last year there were. So we were all very enthused about that, but it's not a guarantee. And then we kind of get into the waiting game one more time. And between March and May, finalist notifications go out. So the semifinalist level is when here on the United States side, all of the people who coordinate Fulbright go, yes, these are the people that we want to actually send over for evaluation to the host countries. And then between March and May, the people in the host countries go, okay, we've looked at everybody you sent over and we are offering the grant to this select number of applicants. And then we all get to be very excited for you. But it's just a long waiting game.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I know that this is quite the information dump, and you will have access to the recording to kind of loop back if you missed something. What I want to do before we continue is just briefly touch on that intent to apply form. So this is our form. This is LMU's internal form. Whatever you put in this form never gets shared with Fulbright, never gets shared, really outside of your Fulbright mentors. And what does it ask for? It's asking, which grant do you think you're going to apply for? So which host country? We want you to start thinking about, okay, who might you ask for a letter of recommendation? Because all the grants require 3 recommendations. We ask for you to start thinking about the different application components, but it's important that you submit what you can by June 1st, knowing that anything you put in that form can still be changed after that. So, this is at least the first checkpoint that sort of triggers to us that you are applying, and then grants you access to the additional support through our office. So that's an assigned Fulbright mentor who's going to be your sort of go-to contact in addition to Lindsay and myself. And then you have a Brightspace course. So this is a free Brightspace course for those that just graduated. You're not going to be done with Brightspace just yet. It's self-paced. There are different short tutorial videos that help guide you and kind of clarify each application component. The writing workshops, right, are outlined very clearly there. But it is a really valuable benefit to applicants applying through LMU. So it's important that you let us know by June 1st if you're planning to apply through that intent to apply. The later, in the summer, we may have to have a conversation if you still have time to submit competitive application, and especially for the research and independent project grants, and even the graduate study. The later in the summer, the more difficult it is to get all of the application components that are required together. Even ETA, right? We really want to encourage you to think of June 1st as like, I'm going to commit to at least applying. I can still change my mind, but I'm going to fill out this form about where I think I might be going and why. Okay, almost at the end. I know we're already over on time a little bit. Lindsay spoke to this earlier, but Lindsay, did you want to mention this again?
Just to put it out there one more time, like we're very flexible and we want to be as accommodating as possible. So our office has made a commitment to trying to increase access. Please let us know if there's any way that we can like provide you with materials that maybe don't rely on like, color vision, or that might be a little bit more accessible for screen readers. If some of the deadlines that are coming up, you have extenuating circumstances, start talking to us about those situations as early as possible. And then, this is regardless of whether you've had a disability that's registered with DSS or not. But then also, if you are a continuing student, whether it's a grad student or a rising senior, please go ahead and communicate with that office so that you're just getting general like accommodation support while you finish out your degree here at LMU.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, so these were questions submitted in the registration form that I want to make sure we either already addressed or can address right now. We are over time, so if you do need to duck out, this is being recorded. We will share this with you afterwards. So first question, and Lindsay, maybe you and I can just go back and forth on these. Is there ample opportunities for my field of study, I think is what it was supposed to be? Yes. I mean, this is open to all disciplines, all backgrounds. Now, again, depending on what you specifically are envisioning, may or may not be feasible within the Fulbright requirements. And so that's when we can have a conversation. What do you mean within your field, and what is it you're looking to do?
All right. So how do the creative art grants work? So you structure the entirety of your project, and your application materials. I mentioned earlier about the statement of grant purpose. You basically are explaining your timeline, how you can accomplish what it is that you say that you want to accomplish during your grant. And then in terms of some examples of past Fulbright scholarships, with visual arts in particular, what we can do is like maybe a deep dive later. So whoever submitted that question, if you want to come in for advisement, we can kind of explore Fulbright's website together. But for what it's worth, we have not had a ton of students from LMU or alumni from LMU apply for creative art projects. So we do want to see more of that, especially if you are, extending projects that you've had from your time at LMU, or maybe if you did a master's degree at LMU, then like how are you extending from stuff from your bachelor's program as well? But in any event, like Cassie was talking about earlier, it is really truly independent. And what you will need to do is find somebody in the host country who's willing to at least vouch for you that you will be there and can get connected with the resources and the materials so that you can complete your project. But it's very case by case depending on what you specifically mean by visual arts in this question. So happy to chat later.
Yeah, and I think I'll combine the next two because it's about the research projects and proposals. So kind of mentioned this earlier, but the strongest proposals are from candidates who have extensive either undergraduate research experience or research experience. Maybe they're doing an extension of a past research project. As far as if it's within a certain scope, that is difficult to say because we don't know what you're envisioning. To what Lindsay said earlier, we are available throughout the summer and really throughout the next month, rather. I would suggest an individual advisement appointment. We can meet on Zoom or on campus, but that way we can kind of hear what you're thinking and kind of guide you whether or not it's within the scope. For Fulbright, scope is really defined by feasibility. You have, maybe 9 months to do your project. Is the scope reasonable within that time frame? What resources do you need? Are those available? If not, how are you going to obtain those resources? Right? Do you need support from people in country? How are you going to ensure that support is available? Right? So scope is really difficult to discuss without knowing what the project idea is at this time. But please don't be afraid to reach out to us and have a conversation so we can kind of hash through that before you get too far into the application process.
All right, so our next question here is any advice on what application cycle I should apply to? In other words, should I apply now or should I wait? So without knowing the grant type, I'm going to go ahead and spitball here. So for ETA applications, I don't think there's any necessarily guidance about whether to apply now or later. What I will say is that any experience that you can gain between now and your application, whether that means that you're going to apply this October or in a future cycle, any experience that you can gain in teaching. So for example, let's say that you just graduated with your bachelor's degree, you're going directly into the workforce right now, but somehow you become a trainer, right? So that's a form of teaching. Anything that you can glean from that or gain from those experiences will make you more competitive as you can communicate about yourself in your application. Cassidy mentioned earlier that there are some countries that might be looking specifically for career professional educators. A lot of countries are not specifically looking for people who want to eventually become career and professional educators, though. And so for those countries in which they are looking for people who want, a career in teaching or a career in teaching English in specific, yeah, maybe you do want to wait until after you've completed like an educational program at the master's level. But that's if you're just super tied into that one country. If you can be more flexible with it, maybe we can find another country that's a little bit more entry level in what they're looking for with their English teaching skills. For the other degree types with regard to, with the other grant types with regard to like degrees or independent projects, I would say, definitely, apply the year before you plan on attending that graduate program, for example. We already heard previously from Cassidy about how more or less if you're trying to attend graduate school in the 24-25 year academic year, the application for Fulbright for that was last October. So do plan ahead if you are wanting to pursue a degree grant. For the independent projects, though, you should plan a year plus in advance, which is to say whenever your project is going to take place. And I mentioned earlier doing something like a project on the monsoon season. Well, that's like a very specific part of the calendar year for whatever country you might be looking at. And so, making your planning your project and then applying for the application prior to that season of the year is going to be crucial for the timing of you to complete that project. So that's my very blanket advice about that. If there is something that's a little bit more specific, then again, we'll chat in advisement. But I'll pass it to Cassidy to answer the next question.
And I think just to add to that, with the ETA, there are some actually quite a few countries that are on the opposite academic calendar than us. So your grant wouldn't start until maybe March of 2026. And that means if you are, for instance, thinking of Fulbright as a gap year opportunity, which some of our rising seniors often approach it as a gap year, to say, I want to take a year teaching English, but then I'm going to go into law school or grad school or enter industry. You would then be gone from March to November. And so that would put off another year of you entering grad school because of how our admission cycles work. So you have to read, like, when is the start and end date for specifically the ETA awards, even the graduate degree grants, just to make sure that you are factoring in if it has an opposite, academic calendar than we have in the States, particularly in Latin America, some East Asian countries, possibly Australia, have to double check. So make sure you're looking at that, because if you have a very clear timeline for your life, first of all, I applaud you. I never had a timeline for anything, but if you're on track for something, sometimes you might have to choose a different host country if they're on the opposite calendar than what you were anticipating. And then the last piece about when to apply, keep in mind you can reapply. In fact, Alexia, and she's always so gracious about sharing this. This was her third time applying for Fulbright before she got it. And we have another current ETA who's abroad. This is her second time applying before she got it. So you can reapply. And so if it's more about, when am I the best candidate? It can be now, it might be next year, it might be in 2 years from now, but you will always have access to our office as an alum. So keep that in mind, that one, yes, you can reapply if you don't get it. Two, you can apply as alum several years out. I think we covered most of the others. The last one I think I'm going to jump to is the final. Does having a master's increase chances of selection? It depends on the grant type. There are certain, and host country, there are certain countries and grant types that say they give preference to graduate students, or so those that have maybe recently graduated with a master's degree. Others where that qualification isn't there, and it's more about your experience. So, you might have a master's degree, but maybe no teaching experience. And if you're applying for an ETA, are you going to be any more competitive than an undergrad who has lots of tutoring and volunteering experience? It depends. And that's probably something you'll hear from Lindsay and I throughout the process. It really does depend. Please do not be afraid to reach out to us to have that tailored conversation about who you are and what you want to do through Fulbright. And then we can kind of be more specific with your circumstances. Any of these that we didn't fully address, Lindsay, that you want to add on to?
Nope. Nope, just think through it. I think that's pretty good.
Great. For those still here, thanks for sticking with us. We are going to open it up to questions. You will have access to these slides, which has all the different links. The one that I talked about was our alumni directory here. These are our Fulbright alums from LMU. It has their email, their contact information, so please do reach out. This slide shows you Fulbright-led events. So throughout the summer, they do webinars. These are just a few between May and early July. But this is another resource, another application support in addition to what you're going to get from our office and from LMU. So please take advantage. They do a really great job with their programming. And I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions. Either put in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. As you maybe think about questions, just to reiterate, if you want to apply for this open cycle, the 2025-2026 program, the first checkpoint for LMU is June 1st. So you have to submit that intent to apply form. After today, not only are you going to get the slides in the recording, but you've now expressed interest in Fulbright, so you're going to get our newsletter that is tailored just to Fulbright. And this is going to come out on Monday. It's going to have the intent to apply form and instructions. It's going to have those tutorial videos that show you how to navigate the website so you can find exactly what you're looking for. It also has some supplementary resources and tools, including some assessment like documents that can help you find the best country, grant type, all of that. Use those tools, because I promise you, the more like upfront legwork you do now between now and June 1st, then we can really focus on writing a quality application. If we're still trying to figure out exactly where you want to go and what you want to do in mid-July, it becomes a little bit tighter, right? The timeline just becomes tighter, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So whatever you can do between now and June 1st to do some of that upfront exploration is just going to set you up for success for the summer workshops and other support.
All right, Cassidy, we had a question about how can folks schedule one-on-one appointments with us. And so I did put our booking page URL in the chat. And the follow-up question to that is, which header should you use? Go ahead and use the services that are under the Fulbright U.S. Student Program header for that one.
And if you haven't met with us before, we might also send you our intake form, just so that we can be prepared when we meet to get a little snapshot of who you are. Yeah, Zoom and on-campus appointments will be available throughout the summer. There is going to be a period, July 8th through August 15th, where we will only be offering Zoom appointments because there's going to be some traffic on campus. So we will be working remotely during those times, but we can still meet on Zoom. All right, any other questions? Before we end, I will make a quick plug to tell your friends, other LMU students, even students not attending LMU, tell them to go to their fellowships office. Fulbright is a fantastic opportunity, and it breaks my heart every time a student comes into my office, says, I didn't know about this until, after I graduated. And again, it's not too late to apply, but maybe they're already on track to do something else. And so if you can let your friends, LMU students, know about this, tell them to reach out. We really do want to make sure students who are at least aware that this opportunity exists and that there is a lot of support through LMU to help you through the process. Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend. We'll send out the slides, the recording, and all the other resources. Reach out if you need anything.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.